Hello there, YouTubers. Welcome to another video. It's been a long time since I did a video last time, or maybe at least a month. We got winter here. Not much of it, but a little bit of it. It's cold, -degrees, and today we have a thin layer of snow out on the ground. So thin, it's thinner than the teenager's first attempted mustache. That's how thin the snow lies on the ground. Hope we get more. I never liked thin mustaches. This time I'm going to look back a bit on an old idea for a video. I made a video back in 2010 called Records Once Owned by an Idol, or something like that. That's the theme of this video. I'm going to show you some records that once were owned by old idols, old favorites of Swedish entertainment, celebrities, Swedish celebrities. So if you're not from Sweden, you will most likely not have heard of these guys, but if you're from Sweden, you should have heard of them, and I'm quite sure you have. First of all, I talked about some jazz albums that I bought back in 2010. These are 4, 5, 6 jazz albums with jazz from the 1920s and 1930s. We got Fletcher Henderson and his orchestra, 1927 to 34, on the Jazz Star Series number 16. And we have another one in the same series with Fletcher Henderson, recordings from 1936 on the Jazz Star Series number 4. And what do we have more? Another Fletcher Henderson, Smack Connie's In Orchestra, on the Ace of Hearts label. These are very nice issues from the 60s, by the way. And this is a 70s issue, though, I think. King Oliver, New Orleans Shout. Was that all? Oh yeah, no, these two as well. On the Regal label, the Washboards Get Together. Midnight Rhythm. Yeah, the Washboard Rhythm Band and the Washboard Serenaders. And this Parlophone compilation, the Territory Bands, 1926 to 1929. And you may have noticed that you see this little sticker up here, and there's a similar sticker on all of these albums. And let's see if the camera here can zoom in on this. Come on. Yeah, I think so. I'm not sure if you can read it, but it says Lasse O'Månsson. And when I found this, I got like warm in my heart, because Lasse O'Månsson, apart from being a jazz enthusiast and who had a big jazz collection, he was, let's say, he was the father of sick comedy in Sweden. He started on radio in the 1950s and did lots of comedy radio there with a very surreal and some would say sick humor, where he twisted words around, played with the language, very playful. I would maybe not say that all of it were that funny. It's not like haha funny, but it's a bit mad. And also he became the first chief editor of the Swedish version of the Mad magazine. So and he, in the mid-60s, or maybe even late 50s, no, I'm not sure, yeah, somewhere around that time, and he was the editor for that magazine up until the mid-70s, and I don't think that the magazine would have continued to exist up until the early 90s if it wasn't for the impact of Lasse O'Månsson. He was also an author that wrote many books, most of them with this surreal humor, weird texts. And yeah, I'm not sure everybody would really like his style today, but and I don't like everything I've read about him, but I admire his guts to actually play around with words and play around with language and just try to make as little sense as possible in many cases. So I have here an album, a live album from 1977, where, well, he's more of a, he's a bit more accessible on this album. It's like a stand-up comedy album, Spräck upp amigos. And there were other albums too with his recordings. Not all of them are that accessible, but this is a really fun album that I often like to listen to. This is Lasse O'Månsson at his very best, I think. Yeah. So when I managed to, for a very small sum, get these albums, I found them in a store in Solna. Often you get a bit annoyed about these name stickers on old albums, but this time I thought, no, they'll stay there, because they were owned by a legend. Some years later I went to a record store in the southern part of Stockholm, Södermalm, and I've been a fan of the American comedian George Carlin for a long time. And even if, well, I've heard downloads and MP3s of his recordings and also seen a lot of him on YouTube, I've had big problems finding his albums. And I think I had been actively looking for his albums for maybe 10 to 15 years. And in those 10 to 15 years, maybe only I found 2 albums, because he wasn't that famous here in Sweden, and I don't even think that, apart from imported albums, that his records were that much sold here. But when I went into this store in the southern part of Stockholm, I managed to find 10 George Carlin albums. 10 of them. To show you. I mean, in America, in USA, I'm sure these are very common and easy to find, but not in Sweden. We've got this classical one, FM and AM, Class Clown, also a classic, because it contains the 7 words you can never say on television, you know that one, I'm sure. And then others on Little David, like Occupation Fool, Toledo Window Box, George Carlin, An Evening with Wally Londo, and so on the Road, Killer Carlin, Carlin on Campus, what's this then? Playing with Your Head, and then Indecent Exposure. I've shown these in another separate video some years ago as well, and I was amazed to find all these albums after all this time. And then it's like the ketchup bottle, you shake it and shake it and shake it, and you don't get anything until everything comes out. So the record store owner knows that I had big interest in comedy albums, so he seemed pleased that I was getting them. And then I said, well, actually, I'm a bit surprised, because I've been looking for George Carlin albums for so many years, and I haven't found, well, more than 1 or 2. But now all these at once. And then he bent forward and, like theater, whispered to me, well, you see, these comes from the record collection of the late Brasse Brännström. And who was Brasse Brännström then? Well, he was an actor and comedian who had a very popular children's show together with Magnus Härenstam and Eva Remaeus, called Fem myror är fler än 4 elefanter. And through that TV show, that was like a Swedish version of Sesame Street, generations of kids have learned the letters, and because it's been, of course, aired over and over and over again. It's been available on VHS, on DVD, and now on streaming, and it goes on children TV channels. So it was made back in the 70s, but still children of today have a fair clue of who these were, and so on. And that's, I mean, that's the best way of really surviving for several generations, is take part in children culture and make children TV, because the children who have seen you as a kid, they will remember you for the rest of their lives. Anyway, so and I have no reason to doubt that it was true, that it came from his collection. He had died maybe 6 months earlier, very suddenly, surprising. And because apart from the children's shows, he also made adult shows together with his comedy partner Magnus Härenstam. And this is probably their most famous comedy album, Varning för barn, Warning for Kids, or Beware of Kids. This is Brasse Brännström. And actually, they have now and then borrowed some ideas from George Carlin's repertoire. For instance, this record contains a track called Klassens Clown, and that is, of course, a Swedish version of Class Clown. And I've seen here on the back sleeve that he has made some marks and written with a ballpoint pen, like a exclamation mark at some tracks, and a little X at some of the tracks. Like this album starts with "Welcome to my job," and they have made a version of that track in Swedish as well. So that's quite funny. I mean, these tracks that are quite famous, these comedy numbers, famous as Swedish numbers, some of them are actually from the George Carlin repertoire, and I've got the records that Brasse himself had when he listened to them and got the ideas for the Swedish equivalents. So those are proud possessions of my record collection too. Not just the fact that I love George Carlin, they have once belonged to a childhood favorite in Brasse Brännström, the late great Lars Brasse. I have talked about those records that I showed before earlier in this video. I've talked about them in separate videos years back when I found them. But this is like the third part. It will lead into the first part, the second part, that will lead into the third part now. And I'm talking about the Swedish entertainment legend Povel Ramel. I've talked about him many times. He looked like this. And recently, a friend of his family, and also the boss of the Povel Ramel Appreciation Society, record collector and radio personality Anders Elderman, got the opportunity to sell off some of Povel Ramel's own records from his record collection. And guess who bid on some of them and got them? I picked also ones that I thought would be very interesting, that appealed to me, and well, now I got them. And I also got a paper where it says that the albums actually are taken from the Povel Ramel collection, and that's nice. So, which albums did I get? First of all, I got one with, I think he's born in Australia, although he feels very British, the singer and entertainer and songwriter Paddy Roberts. Not that famous in Sweden, but some of his songs have been famous because of the fact that another Swedish entertainment legend, Tage Danielsson, put Swedish lyrics to one of his songs. And that song was "Love Isn't What It Used to Be," and the Swedish version with him is called "Kärlek har ändrat karaktär." Anyway, so Paddy Roberts made very elegant music hall style piece numbers with a bit of a naughty tint on the lyrics, and not in a really bad way, but a bit of a yeah, cheeky. He was a bit cheeky, and I've heard about him because both Povel Ramel and Hasse och Tage, Hasse Alfredsson and Tage Danielsson of the Hasse and Tage comedy team have talked about Paddy Roberts and the fact that they've listened to him. So I've been keen to find some of his albums, but it hasn't been that easy. But now I got one, and it's called Paddy Roberts Tries Again. It's a mono album on Decca, and it comes from the Povel Ramel collection, which is very nice. And I'll listen to it. I like the songs. They are very clever, very clever. And I found this at the Palace with Smith and Dale, a record from the early 60s or maybe late 50s. Not really sure, I don't remember now. But Smith and Dale, they were vaudeville comedy team in the USA that started acting together in 1897. And I think they were a comedy team for over 70 years until one of them died. Isn't that amazing? And this is, of course, an album from their later years, where they are probably redoing these comedy skits that they've been doing on stage for loads of years, like Dr. Cronkite and His Only Living Patient. You can find it on YouTube if you want to watch it, in many different versions, one from the 30s and one from the 40s and one from the 50s and so on. And probably they did it back in the early 20th century as well. So, and this is on Jubilee. I've never seen this album before, and I thought that it would be very interesting to have. Oh yeah, then a Swedish record with a Swedish comedian, and well, it's very difficult to explain him unless you really know who he is. Kalle Sändare, his Christmas record. He used to make phone calls to people who had put out different adverts in the newspapers, and more or less talked his nonsense talk to them, and it's really weird and it's really odd. And he's had he also has a appreciation society nowadays called Gris och skridskoföreningen. That's Pig and Skate Club. And I already have this album. I bought my copy back in the 80s. This is from 1973, but this is a copy that has been owned by Povel Ramel. And one funny thing, do you know who wrote the text on the back sleeve? No, not Povel Ramel, but Lasse O'Månsson, that we talked about earlier. Yeah, what's more to show? I think we can show this. Charlotte Rae sings songs I taught my mother. Great comedienne and actress Charlotte Rae. It's an old album back from, I think, 1955 or something. Charlotte Rae died fairly recently, I think in August this year. Some other cheeky songs I taught my mother in, unlike many of the albums with a theme like songs my mother taught me and so on. So they're a bit more risky. Yeah, I think there were some others too, but I'm not going to bore you with all of them. Just saying that, well, sometimes it gives an extra dimension to actually know that people you admire, that you really admire, that your idols have once handled the same exact album copies that you are handling now. I think that is quite cool, I think. Or maybe it isn't. I think so. All right, Everybody, thanks for watching and have a nice day and welcome back.